So welcome to New York Buddha Dharma. Tonight I'm going to talk about the first half of the chapter on Tantra. It's a long chapter and there's a lot in it. So, last week we discussed the previous chapter, which was Shunyata, on Shunyata. And the idea is that the practitioner is treading and progressing the path, along the path, and begins to have an understanding of what emptiness is, that the world is not the ordinary world that he or she thought it to be, of I and other, a world with a true future and a true past for all the things that exist in it, and that this whole notion is just that, a notion, an idea, and that in reality, which arises in the present moment, when it's seen stripped of concept, there is no I and other. Just as when we come fully present, whenever we come fully present into the present moment, all thoughts of I and other evaporate, and there's just awareness of this clear, open awareness of the phenomena of the present moment. And this idea that what the true world is something that's stripped of concepts of any kind, including the concepts of things existing, that I exist, that others exist, and it's just this continual arising and passing away of phenomena which have no substance in the present moment. And the phenomena are the objects of sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, and mental events. And there's just a continual display of them. And that this is what is meant by emptiness, by shunyata. It's empty of concept, and it's freeing. Because as long as we believe in I and other, we are bound to very unhappy stories about I and other. As soon as we have this idea of oneself, I, the hero or the heroine, there is a relationship with other, and there's an automatically a story of what that relationship is. And all stories, in all stories, we're the heroes or the heroines, both. And we're on a quest to achieve some kind of good by manipulation of the world around us. And when we succeed, we're happy, and when we fail, we're not. And sooner or later, everything that we gain is taken away. So there's always endless suffering, loss of one thing or another. Even if we get all the things we want, love and fame and money and pleasure, one thing we are not going to get is eternal life. And so we watch our youth stripped away and our health deteriorate as we age, until finally we lose everything when we die. So emptiness is really cutting through that kind of suffering, cutting through to reality. And what reality is a constant arising and passing away of the phenomenal world, without any substance to it, without a past or a future. The past is just a story that we tell, a very particular, limited, idiosyncratic version of what might have happened. We sort of select out, we cull out little details based on the patterning that each one of us has developed in our minds. And the future is just the same thing. It's just the past projected forward. So if we have events in the past that we wish we hadn't experienced, then we imagine a future without them, or correcting them, or curing them. And the future, of course, never arrives either. The future is even more illusory than the past, because as we know, it never arrives as we imagined it would at all. Because as we imagined it would was so thin and faint compared to the vibrant reality of life when it arrives in the present moment. So what the Bodhisattva is discovering is, and what the Bodhisattva is interested in, is freedom. Freedom from the stories of I and other, the dramas, the gain, the loss, which is mostly loss, one way or the other. I mean, even when we gain something, we're afraid that we're going to lose it as we're gaining it. So even getting what you want has this undercurrent of pain in it. And then, of course, when it eventually leaves us, that's painful even more. So the Bodhisattva, in discovering that all of this was a mistake, really, a conceptual mistake, steps into the present moment, discovers emptiness. Empty of what? Empty of I and empty of other. Egolessness, and the fact that even the other doesn't exist in the way that we literally thought it did. And really the Bodhisattva path is about what comes along with that discovery, which is increased intelligence, enormous clarity, the clarity of just being able to rest one's mind in the present moment, right here. And that this space is so clear and full of knowingness. And as well, compassion. And the compassion arises because one sees that lots of other sentient beings are still trapped in their prisons of conceptual struggle. And the Bodhisattva, is free from that. And so the Bodhisattva wants to help other people. And more than that, the world begins to arise and demonstrate its interconnectedness. I mean, when we're engaged in, the I-other games, all we see is oneself and other, and everything else fades into the background. If there's somebody you love and you want to seduce, all you see is that person, and everybody else becomes unimportant. If there's a project that you've got, like to make money, what everybody else is doing fades into the background and becomes unimportant. So what the Bodhisattva begins to see as he or she comes present is everything that's going on. And it's all arising interconnectedly. Just like right now in this room. We're all sitting here, and amidst the cushions and the floor and the sound of the air conditioner and the walls and everything, and it's all of a piece, like a puzzle that's been put together by some deus ex machina, someone outside. They fitted all the pieces together, and they fit together absolutely perfectly. And here we all are, living and participating and moving in synchronicity like a machine. And that, understanding that and beginning to appreciate that, and to move in synchronicity with it is the meaning of compassion as well in the Mahayana. But still, the Bodhisattva is dwelling on this discovery of emptiness because it represents freedom from the prison of samsara, freedom from the prison of conceptual stories that we believed, which are full of gain and loss, and inevitably a lot of loss. And it's like you're a hero and a heroine, and you're out to win the day, and will you win the day? And there's a big dramatic story. It's like a movie that we live in. We live in lots of little different movies going on in our lives. And what the Bodhisattva has discovered is freedom from that. I mean, and also the giving up, this involves the giving up of reference points. It's a very dizzying prospect, I think, for the Bodhisattva initially, because it's like you lose the ground of where you are. You thought you knew where you were, you thought you knew who you were, where you were going, what your problems were, what your virtues and failings were, what your goals were, what you wanted to avoid, all these things. And all of that is stripped away as just being stuff, a story, bullshit, that a myth that we believed in. And instead, what's left is just this arising and passing away. I mean, it's karmically determined. We're all New Yorkers. That's our karma. We can't step out the door of this meeting room and wind up in Istanbul. That's our karma. But the stories about who we are and what we need and what drives us, that's what goes. And it leaves us without a lot of reference points that are taken away. I mean, I remember Trungpa Rinpoche telling us health. That's like a punctuation mark. Remember him telling us that it's like jumping off a cliff? He used to say, they said, please, you can take the leap, he used to say. Take the leap. He used to enjoin us to take the leap, jump off the cliff, let go of all the reference points. It's falling through space. And then there was that thing that got passed around, that email quote where he said, the bad news is we're falling through we're falling through space without a safety net. And the good news is there is no ground. But I mean, isn't that a wild idea? To give up all of our reference points of who we are and where we're going and what our values are and all of that, and just to simply react and to deal with what is happening in this present moment. And then in this chapter, Trungpa Rinpoche makes the point that as we begin to come into this kind of awareness, this clear, open, restful, it's effortless awareness. And this is the mind of vipassana, it's the mind of shunyata, it's the mind of mahamudra, it's the mind of dzogchen. It's clear, it's sharp, it's stripped of false ideas, of any ideas. But then all ideas that we lay on it are distortions, unnecessary. And that as we begin to come into it, there is huge peace. That's amazing. It's peaceful, this space, because there's no more Sturm und Drang, storm and thunder, all that hope and fear. Every time we come present, there's enormous peace. And that this peace is rooted, he said, in the solidity of earth. It's like we sit on the earth, we stand on the earth. This is our earth. And as we come present into this, onto this earth, in this clarity, it's very, very peaceful. and that this is something that the Bodhisattva experiences more and more on the Mahayana path. Stable, deep-rooted, solid, he said. Invincible peace. He said, here are the adjectives he used for it. Indestructible, because it's just the quality of this. Powerful, because it has no hope and fear to it. Invincible. How can you even begin to attack it, much less conquer it? It's nowhere and everywhere. Stable, deep-rooted, solid. It has the quality of earth. Every time we come present into this clarity, there's enormous peace, which I think is a tremendous help to realize that, because it seduces us into awareness. I mean, don't we want that peace? Don't we long for it? And to be able to achieve it all we have to do is remember to come back to our lives in the present moment. He said, if we have power in ego's sense, then we use it against others, and we always feel insecure. We want more power. We never have enough. And that's what's given up, that kind of false power, the power of I. I against you. I against them. Which is always, it's mean, because it's attacking others, and it always has insecurity as its foundation, as its core. He said, as bodhisattvas, we do not use power to undermine people. We simply remain peaceful. I can think of some people I know who I think, what's the word I want? Demonstrate this, model this for us. Some people, it could be my imagination, but I think each one of us can find this in ourselves. Can you? Let's have some discussion about this idea of peace. I think this is so remarkable in the first part of this talk. Anybody? No? Peace.
What just came to me as I was accepting the microphone is that there can be different definitions or perceptions on our part for peace. I think what you're speaking of, but correct me if I'm wrong, is more like absolute peace, rather than what I would call relative peace. Simply relative to my usual stirrings and excitements and so on and so on. Then if suddenly there is this gap, that for me is very much peace. That's all. Just that I think it's more experienced as relative than absolute, at least in our earlier stages along the path. Do you agree with that?
I think so. I think if I understand you correctly, yeah. But I think that absolute peace is that you're as you describe it, is available all the time.
Yes.
Every time we come back into the present moment and rest our minds in this clarity. That it's really just another property of this field, the field of being. This field is lit with knowingness. It's full of the arising and passing away of different phenomena, and it's full of peace.
free of all discursiveness. Another way that I would describe it.
That's a good way to put it.
Which is big relief, you know.
Yeah.
And the word abiding comes to me as well.
Abiding?
Abiding.
Yeah.
And abiding peace.
Yeah. I like that. Michelle?
One thing comes to mind is the recent events in Las Vegas where the people were enjoying a concert and suddenly there was gunfire and all chaos ensued. But in spite of that, so many people acted with such courage to help others. So within that chaos, there was a complete sense of some kind of peace, some kind of awareness, and of just taking the space and the time to think of the person next to us, you know, whoever it was, and help them. And acts of courage and bravery. I think that comes from a great deal of that sense of peace. Where in spite of, because it's very easy to be peaceful if you're sitting in a retreat cabin and there's nothing going on, except your own practice, let's say. But to practice that kind of generosity and bodhisattva activity in the midst of chaos, I think that's a certain type of peace as well.
Well said. Yeah, I think so too. So that kind of courage, really almost absolute courage, you know, the ability to be present in the midst of chaos.
Yeah, and also the stories that we hear about, you know, when Tibet was invaded and so many teachers were put into prison, and in spite of all of that, they were able to give teachings. They weren't formally allowed to practice, but they did, you know, whatever type of practice they were doing, just being in the space. And you even heard about Chinese guards who went to receive teachings from the great lamas that were in prison. So in spite of whatever the circumstances you find yourself in, that peace can arise.
There's an extraordinary book, maybe you've read it, by a man who died fairly recently, named Adu Rinpoche, called Freedom in Bondage. And he was a Tibetan Lama, High Lama, and he was put in a Chinese prison. He spent 17 or 18 years in that prison. And he went in with the intention of having compassion for his captors. And he describes those 18 years, and they are horrific. You know, what he and others went through. Many of his fellow prisoners died in just terrible conditions, you know, being beaten and exposed to the weather, and you know, it's very difficult. But he and some other lamas, they managed to sort of trick the guards and let them be together, and while they were together, they would teach each other and practice for those 17 or 18 years. It's a beautiful book, and I recommend it. It's a good read. It's almost 2 books. The first half of the book is really a very impressive summary of the Dzogchen teachings, and the last half of the book is the first-person account of his experiences as a prisoner for 17 years.
As Milarepa said, adverse conditions happen. When we do, it's so delightful. We sing a little song of sheer delight.
That's good. Thank you, Rochelle. Thank you. So, then he says that the Bodhisattva progresses along the path, and you see, shunyata represents this big discovery that one was making a mistake, and one can let that mistake go, and now see the world stripped of it. But in doing that, you're still comparing where you are now to the suffering that you had before. How else could you value this so much? You know, you have to value it in comparison to the mistake and the suffering that went before the discovery of emptiness. And so what the Bodhisattva path represents is a gradual falling away of the importance of shunyata. Shunyata is a real quality of reality. It just says that all of this is arising and passing away without substance, because substance is something we give to it through concept. And we've cut through concept with the sword of prajna. We see things very clearly stripped as they are. And as they are, they have no, the technical term is own being. It's usually translated as own being. And they don't have any own being, because they're just it's like pixels going across the computer screen, you know. That's what all of this is that we're sitting in the middle of. But that still, the Bodhisattva sort of looks at that and prizes that understanding, because it represents an escape from the suffering of belief in stories, which we so firmly had or do or did or whatever, depending on our stage on the path. And as what he says is, finally, we reach the end of the Bodhisattva path. You know, it's in 10 stages, so we reach the 10th stage, or even the one beyond, the 11th stage, which is the it's called the Vajra Samadhi. It means indestructible sort of state of awareness. And at that point, this is a huge shock. This is the moment of enlightenment, when the Bodhisattva realizes once and for all that there is no I. I mean, even before, in appreciating the absence of I, the absence of I and other, there was a subtle I and other. Because how else could you appreciate it, you know? Who's appreciating it? Who's saying, oh, look at, isn't this wonderful, shunyata? It's like a subtle version of ego, continuing on, and a concretization of shunyata as being something. And so finally that falls away at the end of the Bodhisattva path, and that's supposed to be the moment of enlightenment. And he says, shunyata as an experience falls away, exposing the luminous quality of form. And what that means is that the idea that all this form that we're sitting in the middle of, the blue of the cushions, the sound of the voice, the sensation of your hands on your thighs, whatever it might be, but all those forms, when they're stripped of concept, including the concept of emptiness, then they emerge really, really vividly. It's like they're much more vivid than they were, because they were being grayed out by some kind of philosophical concern. And the idea that you are wielding this knowledge to see the emptiness, that falls away too. Because, well, that's called prajna, you know, the prajna that allows you to cut through concepts, see things as they are. But still, there's the idea of a wielder, of someone doing it, of a practitioner, someone treading the path, and all of that falls away. And one is left, or if there's even one to speak of, in the middle of centerless space, full of these beautiful arising and passing away of the phenomenal world. And then knowledge isn't something like prajna, isn't something that one owns, that one possesses and wields. It becomes a property of the field of awareness, of the field of being. That all of this is arising lit with knowledge, and that's called jnana, or yeshe in Tibetan, primordial knowing, primordial knowledge. It's primordial, it has no beginning or end. It's just here, permeating everything. He says here, he's talking about the end of the Bodhisattva path, and we're still clinging to emptiness. I heard him say once that at the 10th stage, it's called, that 10th stage is called the Dharma cloud, Dharma Megha, Dharma cloud in Megha in Sanskrit. And he said that the Bodhisattva is kind of lost in this cloud of Dharma, of truth. And the Bodhisattva feels that they're not quite there, that there's something more that needs to be done, that there's something still wrong. And then they realize what it is. And what it is that they're thinking that something is still wrong. And when they realize that, because it implies a whole thing, like I'm going to get something, and there's something more to get than this, some other further understanding. And there is none. There never was any. And when the Bodhisattva realizes that trick that they've been playing on themselves, that's the snap. That's the entrance into the 11th bhumi, the Vajra-like samadhi, the Vajra-like, the adamantine, indestructible state of awareness, because all the idea of I and other completely is gone, seen through. It's like that analogy, that old Hindu analogy of the person who goes into a room, dark room, and they see a snake coiled in the corner, and they're frightened to death. And then someone shines a light, and they see that what they thought was a snake is just a coil of rope. And they're freed from that fear, from that suffering. And they can no longer make that mistake. You know, even when you take away the light, and they're back looking at sort of this vague form of something coiled in the corner, they know that it isn't a snake. Well, that's what happens at the 10th bhumi for the Bodhisattva. That sudden snap of recognition and awareness. And this is the entrance into the stage of Tantra, or the Vajrayana, the adamantine vehicle. Tantra is sometimes called the path of pleasure. And they're not talking about eating good meals or getting good sex. They're talking about the beauty of the arising of the phenomenal world. And he said, in the awakened state, the colorful, luminous qualities of the energies become still more vivid. And that this is great joy. It has this quality of enormous pleasure in the arising of the energies, sort of inherent in them. And Tantra is all about energies. All of this is energy. Just the way movement across a computer screen is energy. Yeah. He says, according to the Kriya Yoga Tantra of Vajramala, I'm trying to remember who Vajramala was. He wasn't the guy who wore the fingers around his neck, was he? Yeah. Well, Kriya Yoga is one of the divisions of the Vajrayana. Here's the quote. This energy is the sustainer of the primordial intelligence, meaning the jnana, that yeshe. This energy, the energy of the rising of phenomena, is the sustainer of this knowingness, this knowledge, which perceives the phenomenal world. In other words, all of this is lit with knowingness. This energy gives impetus to both the enlightened and the confused states of mind. It is indestructible in the sense of being constantly ongoing. This energy, the energy of this constant arising and passing away of all the phenomenal world. And this is what Tantra is all about. This is why it's so colorful and full of personifications and symbols of all this. The yogi finally cuts through dwelling on shunyata and begins to see the luminosity of form, the vivid, precise, colorful aspect of things. There is no veil between him or her and that out there. And then there's an interesting warning that if a yogi, that's us, we're the yogis, works with these energies without having gone through the shunyata experience, it can be dangerous. And I think of people who got hurt working with Kundalini, for instance, because they didn't really have an understanding of emptiness. No, I mean, there is magic in this world, and there are ways of working with it, especially when one gets into the subtle body, the yogas, having to do with the prana and the nadis and bindu. And when one begins to do that, as for instance in Kundalini Yoga, is one way that a lot of people have done, and you have no understanding of emptiness and are still firmly believing in I and other, working with those energies can be dangerous. You can release things that can hurt you.
You mean actual physical hurt?
Physical hurt, yes, and mental. Oh yeah, I mean, I've met people who've been burned by Kundalini, literally.
Yeah, I know people they speak about the release of Kundalini energy as being like they go crazy.
Yeah. All kinds of things can happen. He says, this is interesting, in the Tantric tradition, we do not speak of going beyond ego at all. It is too dualistic an attitude. How about that? Because who's trying to go beyond ego? Isn't that something? And then he says, where am I? Tantra is much more precise than that. It is not a question of getting there or being there. The Tantric tradition speaks of being here. It's like, here we are. We're already here. It's so powerful. It's so amazing what he said, these things. And then he talks about transmutation. And this is very interesting. And the example he gives of transmutation, that you don't get rid of anger. You don't get rid of lust, the so-called defilements. You transmute them. And I was thinking a lot, I listened to Khenpo Namdrol, another teacher that I've studied with, saying about transmutation. Actually, I asked him this question. I said, can you talk about transmutation? And what he said was this, that you can't really understand transmutation until you understand emptiness. That until that happens, transmutation is unavailable. And then I read this story that Trungpa Rinpoche gave us in this chapter as an example of transmutation. And what it was the idea, the story of Tilopa enlightening Naropa. After all the things that he put Naropa through, one day he takes off his sandal and slaps Naropa in the face. And Naropa instantly awakens. That his confusion is transformed, transmuted into awakening. And what occurs to me about that story is that Tilopa completely understood emptiness. And he could see when his student, Naropa, was ready, to let go of the belief, whatever it was, the concept that was keeping him from understanding it. And by slapping him in the face, he jolted him, he awakened him into that understanding that he already had. And this is in line with what Khenpo Namdrol said, that in order to understand transmutation, you have to already understand emptiness. Tilopa already understood it, and he was pulling Naropa into it. So it's very important for us to develop an understanding of emptiness, conceptually and experientially. And we can do it conceptually by studying it, and experientially by coming back again and again into the present moment and recognizing this moment as being what's really real. And the thoughts that we have, the stories we tell ourselves about our gain and loss, as unreal, as being fictions. Rochelle wants to say something. Thank you.
The hardest thing to do is be present.
Yeah. Why do you think?
What's the hardest thing?
To be present.
And why is it so hard?
There are many different explanations, different reasons. One is that people are dissatisfied. If you have a nice meal, it's like, why didn't I have the right dressing? There's always some kind of dissatisfaction going on all the time. And Rinpoche always used to say, there is nothing more, this is it. Don't ask for more. And whenever I see like I want something else, I always say to myself, this is it. There's nothing, don't ask for more. So I remember that, and it's always about that. Though if you're in a nice space, you think, oh, what am I going to do for vacation? Where am I going to go? The mind can never really settle down into the present moment completely. Even if you think you're being present, there's always something else going on. So coming back to the present moment really is the main thing for a practitioner. And I don't know, that's what we work with all the time.
It seems like we have that there are these habits that repeat again and again and again. And that what they say when they describe, the 5 paths, the 4th path is the path of meditation. Once one begins to understand what it is to come back to the present moment, which is the 3rd path, the path of vision, then the 4th path is doing it over and over again. And they say that by doing that, see the reason you have to do it over and over again is because these habitual stories that you've been telling oneself for time immemorial, probably literally time immemorial, time without beginning, that these habitual stories keep arising and taking you out of the present. So every time they do that, then the practice on the 4th path, the path of meditation, is to come back. And they say that by doing that, you burn up those habits, and you burn them up in 81 grades. True. And the 81 grades are, this is so Buddhist, right? Because remember, this is all, a lot of this was created before there was writing. So people used all these mnemonics to remember this. The 81 grades of any given pattern, any given habit, are strong, 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 medium, strong, strong, weak, strong, medium, strong, strong, medium, get it? And you get 81 evidently. I don't know how you quite do that. It doesn't seem to me it adds up to 81, but it gets up pretty high. And supposedly it's 81 grades, and then eventually the thing is gone, by wearing them out. And you're practicing coming back again and again. Every time you have a pattern, you see it, you say, oh yes, I'm having that pattern. I'm going to let it go and come back to this present moment. You switch your loyalty.
The allegiance is always to the coming back to the present moment. That's the allegiance.
That's the allegiance.
The allegiance is coming back to the present moment.
And it's so hard because they're so seductive. They say, oh no, pay attention to me, believe in me. they stories say, you know, oh, it is as bad as you think it is, literally think it is, right? I mean, and it's so painful.
Also, nowadays, meditation is a very popular thing, and there's so many different forms of information about it. One of which I think is very destructive to people is to try to get rid of thoughts, that thoughts are bad. So right away, you're being set up to feel bad about yourself, because if you're constantly having negative thoughts, then you feel like I'm a bad person. But the whole way mind functions is mind always has thoughts.
Is that really being taught, though?
Yes.
People being taught to
Yes.
get rid of thoughts?
Well, they're being taught that if you could, that you know, it would be better.
Well, one of the
That thoughts
things
are
that
enemies.
one of the best things that Rinpoche ever told us was that thoughts come and go. And then when we have a formal practice, then we just come back to the out-breath.
Right.
And that's the allegiance, coming back to the out-breath. Such a simple instruction is really like a lifesaver in terms for a practitioner, because we're not constantly feeling bad about ourselves, because when you practice, thoughts come in. There's so many thoughts that come, so you're not judging your thoughts. That's an amazing thing to tell a student.
It is indeed. I'm looking here where he says, tantric wisdom brings nirvana into samsara. They become one. You know, you when you come to the path, you have this idea: I'm going to get to this better place, nirvana. And tantric wisdom brings the two together. And then he says, you no longer try to abandon samsara, which is thoughts. Peter? Okay. You no longer try to abandon samsara, meaning you no longer try to abandon thought and all of its suffering, and achieve nirvana, some kind of blissful, thoughtless state, because you become one with it, with nirvana, with your state of mind. To do this, you need a partnership with the ordinary world, which is what he literally called ordinary mind. And he introduced the concept here of tamalgishepa, which in Tibetan means ordinary mind. That one is just completely here, awake, watching thoughts come and go. It's like Kensei Rinpoche said up there. He said, you treat thoughts like scenery going by your train window. They don't affect you, you don't affect them. But they're interesting as they go by, and you don't hold on to them. You can't. Just let them go. He said, so the term emptiness is not used so much in Tantra. I mean, it's there, because it's a descriptor for reality. But it's not a big deal anymore like it was in the Mahayana. Mahayana, it was the be-all, end-all. You the discovery of emptiness, of shunyata, of the real world. And now in Tantra, it's really just a descriptor, one of many, it's one of the main ones, but there are quite a few. The other big term that comes up besides shunyata is luminosity, prabhasvara in Sanskrit, ursel in Tibet. Because once we begin to give up our preoccupation with freedom from suffering, then all of this phenomenal world arises very, very vividly, and that vividly is called luminous. Everything is luminous. All the senses are so vivid that they're luminous, they're glowing. And he says luminosity is connected with great bliss, mahasukha, and this is why they call Tantra the path of pleasure. Because that very luminosity is pleasurable, it's beautiful. It's like an act of lovemaking. Here he says, shunyata derives its meaning relative to samsaric mind. If there were, we weren't confused, shunyata wouldn't be here, wouldn't be around. So it derives its meaning relative to samsaric mind, to which it is an alternative. So the dynamic quality of energy is not expressed in it, in emptiness. They're just talking about the fact that form is empty of concept, but they don't talk about this dynamic quality of energy, which is so important. It's the life of the world. And he says we must recognize the thoughts, emotions, and energies of daily life. If we cannot dance with life's energies, we will not be able to use our experience of shunyata to unite samsara and nirvana. So the next topic is has to do with, in Tantra, the meaning and how we use and dance with all of these symbols, these energies, the energies of life, as they're expressed in objects of sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, and mental events. And there are many interesting things to learn about this. It's not just sort of a colorful display, but it actually deals with us. And the more we're open to it, still we, the habitual patterns cling, and they keep arising, and we keep falling back into one error or another, one story or another. But at some point the energies of this world begin to deal with us and to slap us around, and sometimes they can be quite painful, like Tilopa slapping Tilopa in the face, or like Tilopa asking Naropa to give him his wife, Nuguma, as a consort. And then, or just simply like the Dakini energy appearing to the practitioner. This is the feminine energy. Unexpectedly, violently, shockingly, and waking the person up out of some dream, some story they've been living, into the reality of the present world. We often don't recognize these messages that come to snap us out of our stories and into the present. And they can be very powerful, painful, and enlightening, both. All of this is part of Tantra. So it's coming. So we'll talk about the organization of this tantric world in the mandala next time. Anything more anyone wants to say? We're having a good discussion already. We could end. Okay, Sarah?
I was just going to say I was happy you talked about the transmutation, because I was like, what is that? And now I just know I have more work to do with understanding emptiness. But that was helpful.
And we all do. Well, with regard to these defilements, at the beginning stage of the path, the practice is to get rid of them, suppress them, throw them away. And that's the so-called Hinayana stage, lesser vehicle stage of the path. And one is trying to purify oneself, and there's a big self in there, of all these bad things that one does, sins, as it were. At the middle stage of the path, one transmutes them. That is, that you take something that's a defilement, and you transmute it into enlightened energy, or wisdoms, as they're called. So there's transmutation. At the last stage of the path, there's not even that. There's what's called recognition. Just simple recognition. And that's at the Dzogchen stage, the ati stage of the path. That then one simply recognizes all the energies. You don't have to change anything. You just recognize them as gods and goddesses, I guess. So those three stages of... Hmm?
I think this is the time for us to do a doha.
A doha? Wow. All right, but let's turn off the recording. So let's end and then we can do a doha, don't you think? Because I don't want people to be constrained in what they might say.
That's exactly what this is all about.
All right.
Peter, you can write it on your phone.
Who wants to start? A doha, for the listening audience, is a spontaneous song of understanding or appreciation of the Dharma, the teachings.
Keep thinking of one of the Kempo's songs, but I
No, it's this. We have to make up our own.
Yeah, I know. That's like, taking the easy way out. I don't have the inspiration yet.
I've got one. I've got a first.
Yeah. What? Shall I sing it? Do I sing? What's the difference between a doha and a haiku?
Oh, haiku is totally different. It's Japanese form. It has a particular structure. Dohas are free form, and they're about the Dharma. A haiku is about anything.
Do we say it or do we sing it?
We say it. I mean, if you want to sing it, go ahead.
What did I already do?
I don't have any inspiration yet.
I won't be able to transmute until I know emptiness.
I want to live in luminosity.
Here. Thank you. But I am mired in the pit of habitual patterns of hope and fear, sorrow, loss and gain, happiness and unhappiness. Rochelle, stop writing and you got to give us your...
Samsara is the good news. We can wake up. We are very grateful.
We're very what?
Grateful.
I'm very tired of all this I stuff. I really would like to be in the middle and not at the beginning.
Here. The world of luminosity awaits. Okay. Oops, I turned it off. Sorry, I keep doing it. Got it.
I don't have any inspiration yet. I want to be able to transmute until I know emptiness. I want to live in luminosity. What I admire in the habitual pattern of hope and fear, loss and gain, happening and not happening. Samsara is the good news. We can wake up. We are very grateful. I'd like to be in the middle. I'm really tired of all this I stuff. The world, and then you said, the world, what did you say at the end, John? The world is...
The world of luminosity awaits.
The world of luminosity awaits. Perfect. Should we dedicate the merit?
Let's dedicate the merit.
By this merit, may all attain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. By the confidence of the golden sun of the great East, may the lotus garden of the Rigdon's wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled. May all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory. Can I just make one announcement before you shut it off?
Okay, before you shut it off?
You shut it off already? For anyone who will be in New York on October 27th, Omega Institute is sponsoring in New York City at Symphony Space a talk on global compassion with Mathieu Ricard. To be able to feel unconditional compassion, one needs to develop fearlessness, a quote by Mathieu. And Richard Gere will be hosting, and it's a special event sponsored by Omega at Symphony Space in New York City on the Upper West Side. And if anyone wants to buy a ticket, they could go to omega.org.